All right, here we go. So today we're actually going to be having a great conversation in this roundtable discussing about investment properties. So let's talk about investments a little bit. Why invest in real estate? What's a good idea? Is it a good idea to invest in real estate, or is it a lost market?
Well, I personally think that it's a fantastic idea. What I really like about investment property is probably one of the most flexible investment opportunities that there really is out there. I mean, it can provide income, it can provide your mortgage pay down, grow appreciation that way. It's got tax advantages, either in depreciation or 1031s, and you're in control of that investment. So, you can improve a property, you can raise rents, you can lower rents. So you're really in control of that. I don't know of another really good investment that you have that much control over. So I think it's a fantastic opportunity.
Yeah, that flexibility is actually pretty cool with that. So, I mean, that ends up making the property more of a tool when it comes to, buying and creating an investment. What do you think about investing in, Rob?
Well, I agree with the control aspect of it, and that appeals to me personally. So many times when you talk to an investment professional, it's somebody selling stocks and bonds, and they emphasize diversity. But what they're talking about is diversity within stocks and bonds. And it's very important to have diversity in your investment portfolio. Stocks and bonds are great. So's gold. So's a little bit of crypto. Real estate should absolutely be part of that investment portfolio.
Well, I think that's what's interesting about investing in real estate is it actually provides you with a similar dynamic to stocks and bonds because you can get appreciation, you can get cash flow or dividends, and then you can keep the equity when it's all said and done, and you can turn around and flip it if you need to. And so now there's still capital gains and other things like that, but you encounter that even with those types of investments. But as you're getting into this flexibility and stuff like that, and you're seeing people coming in to buy real estate, who do you see? What kind of mindset do you see? Let's talk about first time investors, for example. What kind of mindset do you see with these first time investors that can help them either create success or not create success with their mindset on investing in real estate?
I think so many times it's important to have a very frank conversation with especially with a first-time investor about what their goals are. Um, you know, every first-time investor comes in and they say, "I want to gain appreciation and I want to have cash flow." And it is very, very typical in real estate that you can get one or the other, but not really both, right? And if you get if you're able to get both, then what you've done is either curtailed the amount of cash flow or curtailed the amount of appreciation, more than likely. So I would say be very clear on that particular goal. And as long as you're clear on that goal and then the investment vehicle aligns with that goals, you're much more likely to have success.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuances when it comes to that too. So there's no question that investing in real estate can have its pros and cons with that. I think a mindset piece, like you talked about, is very important. What have you seen, Nathan?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's different for everyone. When I sit down and start to talk to somebody, I always want to start off with, hey, look, we want to start with the right opportunity that fits your life, not the one that sounds the most impressive. Because I get a lot of these first time investors that come in because their brother or their father or somebody has told them what they're doing and how they need to imitate and do that. And sometimes that's just not the right fit for them. I mean, it might be something that's like they're looking for a way to build that long term wealth over 10 or 15 years versus kind of that short term flip that Rod was talking about. So yeah, it's different for everybody, and it really takes an in-depth analysis to really figure out what they really need.
I think that brings up a great point. I want to build on that before we ask Randy what his thoughts are in the mindset of first-time investors. But I think that what I've seen with it is that you really need to identify what they're trying to accomplish with a life after, because really this investment is more about what are they hoping to accomplish? Because if we could accomplish the life without having the stress of a real estate investment, why would we do it, right? And so I think that the point with it is that what kind of life are you trying to achieve with this real estate, and what does it do for you to accomplish that goal? Is that kind of like what you were saying, Nathan?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if you're not diving in and looking at the end result, because a lot of buyers jump into about step four, right? They want to go start looking at this duplex, or they want to start looking at these different properties that they might want to invest in. But it really takes sitting down with them and saying, what do you really want this to accomplish in your life and your long-term plans in your portfolio? and then tailor something around that before you even start to go look.
Yeah, that's a huge question with that. So, Rennie, what do you see as far as first-time investors? What's the mindset that you feel like a successful first-time investor would have?
Well, for me, it's sitting down with the investors and actually finding out kind of like what Rob said earlier. Are you looking for cash flow or are you looking for equity buildup? I think for young investors, most of them kind of want to look for that positive cash flow to have that extra income coming in, and be able to, over time buy more investment properties. Other investors, they kind of look for the equity buildup because most of them they're making that enough money, so it's not quite, to have the cash flow coming in. So sitting down with them and trying to figure out which one is more important to them would probably, define what kind of investment they're looking for.
So, when you're looking at, I'll keep going with you, Randy. What is one of the damaging mindsets that you see with investors, the ones who aren't successful? They come in and all of a sudden they got to, they want to invest in real estate, but then within a very short period of time, they're divesting themselves of all of that stuff. What mindset issues do you think you've seen with people who are in that category?
Well, I think some investors want to have that kind of get rich quick scheme type thing. And I think investment is more of a long-term situation. So, they want to go out there and just buy, for example, a new construction, to where they say, hey, I don't have any headaches. And then, property sits in the market for more than 30 days and they got to make that first mortgage payment. So they're saying, hey, just find me a tenant, find me a tenant. And that tenant that you find might not be the right tenant that you're looking for, you know. Getting an investment property and finding the right person to move in and not having that hardship where that tenant's not going to make the payment and that kind of stuff and having to go through eviction process. That's a very, stressful situation for that first time investor that just says, I just want to be in the game. You got to do the homework first. So that's the thing that I've seen, from first time investors wanting to go in there and try to do it real quick and try to make it happen. And the right investors, what they do is they try to find something that they can get, below market value so that they can get more of the equity in the home or get a better positive cash flow. So, being patient and looking for the right property, I think will help you, get the right investment that you need. And be patient to get the tenant in the home, we scan through a lot of applicants so that you choose the right tenant in there.
We'll get
Because
to that a little bit more later, but go
yeah,
ahead, Rob. I think you had something to say about the mindset piece.
Yeah, and I really wanted to hammer home something that Randy said, that people that have not been in the real estate game 20 years might not realize. One of the things that led to that 2008 financial crisis that we had was we had an environment that was artificially inflating people getting into real estate. And we had a very speculative investment culture that was going on. There were communities in California, there were communities in Washington, there were communities in Arizona where a new home development would be announced, and there was a line around the block where people would be trying to buy a new home. Most of them were investors. And then what would happen was, from the time that they signed on the dotted line to build a house to the time that the house had been built and it was closing time, the home had appreciated by $50,000. And so you were seeing these investors that would, buy a house, they would sell it the day that they closed on it, take their equity, and that led to, tremendous amounts of leverage, tremendous amounts of these people that have these 106% loans, and ultimately led to a global financial crisis. And so, that get rich quick mindset is very, very toxic, not only for your own personal financial well-being, but for the well-being of the country.
Well, let's bring that back to stocks and bonds because we see that all the time in the stock market too. People going for, remember the dot coms and all those great things where, oh man, you got to get in, you got to get in, and everybody gets in, and then all of a sudden it crashes like no tomorrow. It's the same concept. It's just in housing the same way, and so it can be pretty damaging to get in with this get rich quick mindset that you're really going to be pulling it all off. What do you think, Nathan?
Yeah, no, I definitely see that as well. And one other dynamic that I'm seeing in the market right now is with first-time investors, is people that are in their primary residence and they're looking at what it's going to sell for and so forth, and it's been a little flat maybe in some markets, and they're saying, well, I'll just rent it out. And they're looking at what their gross rent difference spread is going to be to their net rent, and they're not really taking into consideration upkeep and different expenses and vacancies and so forth. And after, 6 months of that, a year of that, they're underwater worse than they were if they hadn't rented it. So this reluctant landlord mentality that we see in order to, especially to hold on to like that 3% or 4% interest rate, has been getting a lot of people.
That's a really interesting point. So let's develop that just a little bit further before we get into the next question, because I think that mindset is out there that I just simply am never going to fail because I've got a 3% interest rate. Is that kind of the feeling that you're getting when you see people doing stuff like that? Oh, I was smart enough to get a 3% interest rate. I'm smart enough to manage all of this stuff and keep it going. Is that kind of the feeling that you're getting?
Well, I think that I'm seeing a little of that, but where I'm really seeing that is with people that have been transferred with a job and they're a little desperate. And they're looking at it saying, well, but I hate to get rid of this interest rate because look, I can cash flow it if I rent it out. I can rent it for $2,300 a month and my payments are only $2,000 a month. But by the time they look into and I sit down and educate them on, developing a sinking fund, something to look at, well, you're going to have to replace the furnace in 5 years. You're going to have to do this. They're upside down on that little spread of $300, and they just don't realize that going in. And if they're not getting some professional advice on that, they're getting themselves in trouble within 6 months. They're in a 1 year lease, and they're realizing now they're negative cash flowing and having to dig into their pockets, and that's what drove them into this position in the first place.
That's an interesting point. Interesting point. So let's go ahead because that builds into the next question, which is really, let's say I'm sitting on the market, I'm sitting on $100,000, or I'm sitting on a home that I live in currently at 3%. But let's take it more from the aspect of I'm sitting on $100,000. I'd really like to get into this real estate game because I can see the value, I can see the long-term wealth in building this. What does getting started actually look like? That's a great launch pad for our conversation. What does it look like?
Yeah, I think that that's probably the most common one that I work with isn't a new investor that has a bucket full of cash and is looking to diversify. It's a person that's saying, hey, I'm now ready to move out of my condominium and move up into a single family home. Maybe they're getting married, life change, something along that line, but they want to hold on to their house. Maybe it's not for the interest rate. Maybe it's just for the fact that it would make a very good rental property. And that I think is a great way to get in because you're keeping your existing loan. You're keeping probably a little bit lower of an interest rate just because an investment interest rate is typically a bit higher. And they know the property, so they know what it needs. It's easy to sit down and figure out when we're going to have to schedule some repairs and maintenance and so forth.
Okay. Rob, Randy, either one of you don't have anything to add to that? Okay.
No, nothing to add. Nathan covered it very well.
Okay, so when you're sitting on $100,000, I do see a couple characteristics of this because I see a lot of people that are really enamored with the HGTV version of getting in and buying a house and turning around renting it. I think we've addressed some of that by saying that it's not there, but there's a lot of people who can do this who think it's out of reach. They just think buying and investing in real estate is completely out of reach. What would you say to somebody who thinks that investing and buying real estate is out of reach for me? But they really want to do it and they're sitting on some cash to be able to make it happen?
Well, I mean, it does take more financial wherewithal to buy investment real estate. You have to put more money down. Theoretically, you should already have, a home of your own. And so, your debt to income ratio needs to be, really, really strong. Having said that, again, I think it gets down into mindset. I've had a number of, and I'm sure we'll talk about this later on the podcast, but I've talked to a number of people that have decided when their kid was 1 or 2 or 3 years old to buy investment real estate, maybe take a loss in the cash flow for several years while they build equity. But the ultimate goal for them is to have an asset that they own in total by the time their kid gets to college, and that's their college fund.
Well, that's a good approach too.
That's a good point. That's a good point.
Anybody else want to add to
I
that?
I personally think that if we have these, like we were heard last time about boomers buying all these properties with cash, a good way to use that investment cash is to, buy the property cash and let your children rent the property from you. That's a instead of your child, either living at home and wants to have his own privacy or paying a landlord to an apartment complex. You as a parent buy the property and have your parents pay you, have the kids pay you rent. I think that's a good investment type thing. Teach the
Yeah.
kids responsibility.
Yeah, Randy, that's a really good other way to kind of start to get into the investment mentality. I think that's really smart. Some other ways that I've helped people is to try to get creative on what investing in real estate even looks like. So it might be purchasing a duplex and they live in one side and rent the other, small multifamily, maybe an ADU. We're seeing a ton of those, attached dwelling units that are maybe in the back or just attached to the property above the garage. Those are very rentable. Basement apartments. Also like I've had one person that is renting out their second home now, so it's just not sitting vacant. And business partnerships with family or friends or other business people. Partnerships make a great way to enter the market. Maybe you're sitting on 100,000, but you want to do things in cash. A few business partners might be able to help with that too.
So I want to
Yeah.
build off of that. Oh, go ahead, Rob, before I build off of it. You have something to add. Go ahead.
Yeah, one other creative way to get into real estate, very simply, take your investment home or your current home, your current primary residence, and turn a room of it into an Airbnb. That's investment real estate, and that doesn't require really any more money than you've already invested into buying your own home.
That's a good point. Now I find a lot of first-time home buyers that don't qualify for traditional means of trying to buy a home. Their income is not good, but many times they have the idea that they're going to rent a room out or they're going to do something like that in the process. I mean, have you guys run into that at all?
Yeah, house hacking. Yeah, quite a bit. As a matter of fact, I have two younger people that weren't able to get into properties by themselves, and they went together with friends and so forth and ended up putting together some house hacking ideas, and it worked really well.
Yeah, that works extremely well because especially if you have some form of an operating agreement between the two of you on it, it can actually work out very well so that one can buy the other out after a certain period of time. That is a really good house hack. But here's another house hack that I've actually seen and used quite a bit, where these people who are just marginally trying to qualify, they have a little bit of help to be able to get into the house, but they just simply can't qualify. I encourage them to consider buying a duplex because they can afford a little bit more house. They can get the rent from one side to offset the other. That's almost like a house hack right there. I see a lot of the younger generation getting in like that into these other houses, and then they can get friends to rent the neighbor next door. They can get them to rent that property from them in order to be able to offset their payment. What do you think of a concept like that? Do you talk to any of the? This is more of a first-time home buyer. They're not really planning on being an investor, but it literally turns them into an investor overnight by doing something like that. What do you think about that conversation with them?
Yeah, it's going to depend upon, the willingness of if somebody's buying a duplex, it's going to require more than likely a willingness to live in circumstances that are maybe less than what they could otherwise afford, right? Because if you're spending, I don't know, $400,000 on a duplex, you're probably getting a lifestyle that you would get with a 200 or a $250,000 home, more than likely. But the trade-off there is that, like you said, you have investment real estate that you're, building a future with. So it requires a little bit of longer term thinking and vision. But for the person that's willing to make that trade-off, for sure, it can absolutely transport you into wealth sooner later on in life, right? And I think that anybody will look at any ability to deny yourself a pleasure today just compounds with the amount of life that you can have later on.
Right. And I think getting back to Nathan's point early on, where he was talking about how you have to start with the end goal, because the house itself is probably not the end goal of what you're trying to accomplish. It's the life after that is really what you're looking for. What can you fund through this investment that really makes a big difference? And in my case, I mean, I'm looking to fund retirement. I've got several rentals of my own. I'm trying to keep those going. I think that's a great process, but this creates the next question, which is, after they've gotten their first property, do you recommend that they sit back and learn how to operate it? Or when do you see that momentum starting to change to where they can now start accelerating and growing their portfolio?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's fun to watch that, especially with somebody who's really hesitant, those first time investors and so forth, because the first property rarely makes someone wealthy overnight, as everybody's been saying. It just teaches them how to recognize and finance that second one. And I really like watching that. It's the ignorance that they have going in. They just don't know what to expect. And gaining that experience helps remove that fear. And then it shows them how to then finance and get that second one. And once that ball starts rolling, you see people with 3, 4, 5 different properties over that first decade of their life, and it puts them in a great wealth situation.
What is the mindset shift? What was the light bulb that you saw when that happened? What do you see?
Well, I think what it is when you see somebody that their biggest fear is that they're going to get a bad tenant or something along that line, and you sit down with them and you introduce them to a really good property manager and you help them through some of those situations, they start to gain some confidence in that, and that usually happens within like that first year. And then they start to see the wealth build on that, and that gets them excited about that second one. And now they have maybe some equities that are sitting there that they can roll forward into the next one. And that's what I see. And it's really fun to watch because they get excited about it. And that you probably have a client there for life, building and turning properties and helping them really get to where they want to go.
Yeah, I mean that's fantastic. What do the rest of you see? Where is that momentum change? Where do you think it happens?
Well, and I'm sorry, I wanted to back up to something that Nathan said real quick because he did mention a property manager. And I just wanted to say real quick that, for somebody buying their first home, Nathan had earlier talked about, the control that you get in real estate, investments. And I try to tell, my investors, don't get a property manager, as long as you're living in the market that you have the real estate in. Don't get a property manager. Take control over that yourself. Learn the ins and outs of that yourself so that you feel comfortable and you can recognize what the balance sheet is supposed to look like, right? Before you trust it to a third party. For me, I will say, hey, you probably don't need a property manager until you get to a point where you have a multitude of investment houses, or if you're not living in the market that you have your real estate investment in. Those are the two circumstances under which I would recommend a property manager. Going back to the question you asked about seeing the mindset shift. Again, I just think that it's important that person again roll up their sleeves, get their hands dirty in terms of the management of the property, and once they feel comfortable with what that's supposed to look like, what that's supposed to feel like, and you can financially afford that second house. They just get that appetite to say, oh, I'm making this much equity or I'm getting this much cash flow on this house. I'm ready to double that.
So this is what I love about these podcasts. Now we've got a differing opinion on two different things. One about specifically about property managers, and actually I see both sides of it. So let's develop that a little bit further because I think that some good conflict in this area is actually worth their time. Because I've actually seen buyers get into real estate not understanding how that really when you have a tenant, it is about conflict management. It's
Yeah,
really about conflict management. And if you're not set up for conflict management, maybe you do need a property manager. But let's develop that thought a little bit further, because I think that some of this is the reality of owning an investment, right? Is you have to
Yeah.
decide whether you're the right one to do it. And if you're not, losing a little bit of your investment is maybe worth your time. I mean, let's talk pros and cons. Obviously, we're gonna just kind of keep
Yeah.
this going, but there is a
And
little bit of a disagreement on that, and I think that's a really good thing to talk about.
sure. So, I mean, the one thing that I left unsaid is that at least here in Houston, we do have some property management companies that will, conflict management tends to be eviction, right? And I do get that question a lot of times from, okay, well, what happens if I have to evict this person? And in Houston, we do have some companies that will take on eviction as an a la carte service. And so that's why I'm like, okay, look, as long as you select the proper tenant, you're collecting your rents, and things are going the way that they're going, you really don't need property management. Like you said, conflict management is absolutely where you would want to get a property manager involved. Eviction being the biggest issue, but that's the hack that we have or that we use.
So for me, what I have to say about property management is basically what you mentioned earlier. If your property is located where you live in your area, don't think property management is really required. And it all boils down to having the right tenant, and making sure that you know the condition of the property. Okay. Because having and being an investor, no, and a duplex, as long as you know that all your equipments and appliances and everything is in working order, yes, things can happen. And you screen and you do right with the tenants, I don't think there's property management to be needed because it's pretty easy. Okay. Um, if you know that you're someone that wants to do the kind of investment to where you don't not sure if the tenant's gonna be able to send the payment to you in a method that you prefer, then yes, then you're looking to hire a property management. I think that from what I've seen on the property management side, the fees that they charge, not saying all, but I've seen a couple of property management when the landlord requires a plumber or requires a HVAC person to go check. They don't really do any kind of thing to where it would benefits the landlord at a lower cost. What I've seen couple property management do is, oh, an air conditioner went out, they'll just call someone and whatever that fee is, that's what they're gonna go and charge. So, your profit as being the landlord is gonna be shrinking pretty fast, as opposed to the landlord, the property management looking for a HVAC person that's going to really give you a good rate to help and serve their clients. So, that's my two things about property management. I do know that property management has better connections with attorneys for eviction process. So you as the landlord doesn't have to go through that process if that's need be. But you know, I think that every first time investor should try to manage it themselves for the first year, see how it goes. And if they think that's something that they're not wanting to do, then hire a property manager.
So I'm going to play the devil's advocate, and I'm going to present a couple ideas for you, because I think that what happens in this is, I think a lot of investors get it wrong here. I think that a lot of investors going into the idea that they think that they know what they're doing when it comes to this. And I was one of those, by the way, that they know what they're doing. And the first year I got some tenants in that were, I wish I would have thought through it a little bit more. And I think that that's one value that the property manager brings, is that they've seen it before, they know what's going on before, and they know where the shortcomings and the shortfalls and the pitfalls and all the legal ramifications of what happens and goes on. And in my case, I should have sued my tenants because of the damages that they did to the house. But I wasn't smart enough to think about it. And I think that a property manager would have probably foreseen some of those things. Now, I'm playing the devil's advocate because I think that this is a place where investors can possibly get it wrong. where they can get it wrong very easily, and having an extra voice of wisdom, even if it costs them a little bit extra up front, at least, I'm not saying everybody has to do it, but if you're not fully prepared to manage it yourself and you don't know what the pitfalls are in the first couple of years, I don't know as I completely disagree with either side, but I do have to say that you have to lean on kind of your gut as far as what you know and you don't know. I mean, anybody else want to play the devil's advocate with me here? I love a good
No,
argument, so let's go.
I'm
All
on the
right.
same I'm on the same side as you as far as that
Okay.
goes. And I think that and I see both sides of that, and I think there's some wisdom in saying, hey, manage it yourself, learn it, and then turn it over to property manager. But I think that what I've seen people get into the biggest problems with has been poor tenant selection. They get the
Yes.
wrong person in there, and we have a very complex tenant market here. So our landlord laws are very strict. It's very much tenant favored. And now we also serve Wyoming, where it's exactly the opposite. If you want to get somebody out 30 days, doesn't matter why, it's very simple. So if it was in Wyoming, I'd say you're probably wasting your money for a property manager, because what exactly are they going to do? They're probably going to mark up the repairs. It's going to cost you more. You're going to net less. But down here, that ignorance is what's digging people in the worst. They're getting a bad tenant in there. They have to evict them. There's 7 months to get them out. Imagine what your cash flow looks like with 7 months plus your attorney's fees in order to get
Yeah.
somebody out of a property. So that's a huge mistake. And then, of course, bad leases, something in the lease that doesn't work out because you didn't use chat or something in order to generate a lease, some terrible idea. So that's where I'm seeing a lot of potential property landlords not using property managers really get into trouble.
And I'll back that up. Okay, so here was my mistake, and I'm going to be very transparent with it. I did not have a no smoking clause in my lease. I thought I had a no smoking clause in my lease, but I did not have a no smoking clause in my lease. And guess what they did in the house?
Smoke it.
Not just smoke, they weeded the house. The whole house was full of weed.
That's
And
done.
you cannot get that out of the walls, the ceiling, the carpet, anything. And guess how much that cost you to repaint the entire house and replace the carpet?
More than the deposit, security
Yeah,
deposit.
so I actually think now this is where we're going to really make this podcast work, okay? Because now that there's a little bit of devil advocacy going on with this is where investors get it wrong. And this is one of the biggest pitfalls that can actually happen to take out your profit in something like this. Because in my case, I'm going to be very transparent. I was offered $300 more per month by this tenant, and that was huge cash flow. I got mesmerized and locked in on this thing, but I didn't have the pieces in place to manage the tenant. Now, on paper, the tenant was beautiful, but in practicality and in the end, I got it wrong because I didn't have the pieces in place for this. So I think where people actually, this is where it comes down to, can you manage it yourself? Can you manage it with somebody else? Is I think that the pieces is there's safety in numbers and knowing and having somebody who's been there before. And so it may be great that if you do it yourself, if you got a great team, somebody be devil advocate with me. I like a good argument. So if you have a good team, it's worth it. But if you don't,
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that what this back and forth kind of highlights is, and I find this to be true whether you're talking about investment real estate, you're talking about regular real estate. So many people listen to the national real estate news and they hear that it's raining in Seattle and they think that that's the same weather report for Miami, and so when you hear generic investment real estate advice like what we're trying to give today, it's so important to know what the dynamics are in your market. Somebody like myself or someone like in Randy's market, a property manager might not necessarily be required. In California, in San Francisco, for example, I don't know how you would do property management without a property manager involved because of how complex the laws probably are there. So, it's very important to lean into your real estate advisor for their advice specifically about where you're looking to invest.
well, I think there's more to this because I think you have to understand what the changes are. For example, in Virginia, there was a recent change just instituted literally back in April with the new governor that just came in that changed the entire dynamic of evicting tenants. And so now it's gone from being a fairly easy landlord friendly state to, ooh, it's not nearly as friendly as it used to be. And
Mhm.
understanding those dynamics and being able to understand how to move into one or the other, that's a big deal. Okay. So now let's shift gears back again, because that is one of the shortcomings. That's one of the falls that's where investors can get it wrong. What is, before we move on to the next question, what is one more place? Management's always one place where it can get it wrong. Where's another place that you've seen investors just absolutely, kick the dog and not get it right?
Well, I think it's tenant selection. You know, like I mentioned earlier, don't just go run after the first tenant because, tenant is the landlord's biggest nightmare. What you mentioned earlier about, the smoking. The other thing would be having the correct rental application criteria for the person that's moving in. It's not just credit check, background check. You need to make sure that, for us over here, we do rental verification, contacting the landlord. We also do work employment verification. We make sure that the tenant has 3 times the monthly rent, and make sure that you actually are charging them sufficient security deposit. The biggest issue that we have right now is people coming when people were charging, landlord was charging pet fee, and now they're coming up with emotional support animal. Well, by law, we are not allowed to charge a pet fee for emotional support animal. And people
Really?
would go on, yeah, you cannot. And then when you go online, people say, here's my support emotional animal certificate. Well, those were false, and landlords, most of them don't know that. So what happens is if you have a emotional support animal, remember, I'm not talking about service dog, I'm talking about support animal, emotional support animal. We found out the legal way by going that is to ask the tenant that they have a doctor's note for themselves in regards to this emotional support animal. And I know every state is different. Service dog, absolutely. You give us a service dog information, we cannot charge a pet fee for that either. So people were trying to go around it, and we had to find a way to do it. And like Rob mentioned earlier, or Nathan mentioned it, is that every state has different rules and regulations. And the most important thing that I would suggest an investor landlord is to find a good attorney that draws up the lease. Don't go finding a lease online and think that that's the benefit of it. In Florida, we have a website called evict.com. It's three attorneys that are together, and the attorney put the lease together to protect the landlord. And
That's
so
interesting. That's
that is the lease that we actually uses um, to protect us as the landlord because like I said earlier, don't go chat GTP and try to get a lease drawn up from that. Don't go Googling it. The Florida has in real estate, for realtors, we have a standard fill in the blank lease, and that's not either that great either, you know?
so what I'm hearing you say is, and maybe everybody else can echo this, is that having the right team can really change the outcome.
Correct. Correct.
Okay.
You
Anybody
can
want
find a good attorney to drop the lease to benefit the landlord.
Okay. Anybody want to build off of that, or we want to move on?
Well, I just wanted to make a mention to a different mistake, basically, which is, I've had people that will say, "Oh, I want to buy a $500,000 home, and I want to attract, a higher class tenant, right? Because I feel like the higher class tenant will protect the home, and those reasons." I will say two things. I think first of all, you can buy a higher end real estate and you can try to attract somebody that can afford higher rent. That does not necessarily mean that they will take care of the property. Every family has a 3-year-old that will run through the house with crayons on the walls. So it doesn't matter whether you're renting $1,000 real estate or $5,000 real estate, that can absolutely happen, number one. Number two, my recommendation in terms of, and I feel like this would go pretty well across the country, is that, try to buy real estate that will allow you to charge a rent that is $100 to $200 less than what the entry level mortgage payment would be. Because the person that can afford more than the mortgage is probably going to be someone that can afford to buy a home. And so your funnel of applicants shrinks tremendously. Whereas if you price it slightly below the regular mortgage, yes, you're probably going to be dealing with people that maybe have some lower credit scores, maybe they have less money in the bank, those kinds of things. But your funnel of eligible applicants is exponentially more, and that gives you choice as a landlord. That goes back to tenant selection.
So go ahead, Nathan. You want to say something, then I want to ask a new
I,
question.
I was just going to throw in real quick what mine is that I run into all the time, which is underestimating vacancy rates, underestimating maintenance costs, capital expenses, not creating a sinking fund so they have a place to go to fund those things rather than their own pocket.
And I want that's such an important conversation here. So now somebody's listening to this. We've just gotten last 5, 10 minutes where we've been talking about the downsides of this. But really, real estate can be so transformational for us when it comes to our end goal of retiring and being able to do things, because it's not about the house, it's not about the vehicle, it's about what life does that really create. So if we were putting this together and somebody's listening, oh man, I could never do that. What would you want them thinking instead? What would you want them thinking? What could be the piece that you would want them to think about? Oh man, I could probably test that and try that, because all of these pieces, even though we've been very passionate about them, there are resolutions to them. And bad tenants, yeah, you can have one every now and then, kind of like a bad apple. But now all of a sudden you can change that around. So what would be something that you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, I could never do that? What would you want them to think instead?
Well, I think I
Okay,
would want
good.
them to, yeah, I think I would want them to think, well, let's sit down with somebody and just see what's available. Let's look at what my options actually are. I'm interested in it, or I wouldn't be watching this. So let's plop down with a local professional and just see what those options are. See what is available to me.
Right, because I think what I'm hearing each one of you say, and most, I know you guys well enough to know that you're not transactional real estate agents, the kind that just want to just get it done and get it over with. I think you guys would actually sit down with people and have a really good consultation to help them understand those pieces and get going. But Rob, go ahead. We cut you off.
Yeah, and I've already mentioned it earlier, but the more that you can delay gratification today, the better life you're going to have tomorrow, right? And so, it's like anything else. That's why you put some money into stocks and bonds to grow that account. That's why you put money into any kind of investment, is you're delaying the lifestyle today in order to live the life that you want to live when you're 50 or 55 or 65 or whatever that target date is. And so just know that, especially if you can get involved in investing in, say, your late 20s or your early 30s, it's just going to lead to such a better life. And as I referenced before, I have families that are using their investment real estate to fund college educations. I have other people that are using investment real estate to fund retirements and to fund travel, and early retirement and those kinds of things. So those are the types of things that can be possible by making sure that everybody. If you're not a trust fund baby, everybody has a phase in life where you're living off of ramen and not enough sleep. And that could be in college, that could be for 5 years after college, that can be when you're 45, but you got to go through that phase in order to get to that life of abundance later on.
So let's take this past the transaction. You've helped somebody establish their first rental. Now they're starting to see the value, they're starting to see the momentum. How did this really affect their life? What kind of transformation have you seen in them because of this first investment?
Confidence is one of the biggest things. Obviously, when people don't have the reserves that financially that they want to have, it causes them to withdraw. It causes them to freeze up. It causes them to maybe not make some decisions that may be ultimately better for them in the long term. Once obviously have those reserves, as Nathan talked about, you have control, right? So, having control over something gives you confidence. Having the reserves or the cash flow or the equity that you gain from these investments will give you confidence to make other decisions in life, whether that's in investments or whether that's in choice of a life partner or whether that's in choice of funding certain things that you have a passion about, to do those things at that point in time.
What I have to say is that with any investment, there's some kind of risk. If you're doing it in the stock market or you're doing it in real estate, the one thing I do have to say is that the best way is the residual income that you get from real estate. You will have to do some kind of sacrifice in the beginning, but at the end, you will have that residual income to come in to where when you're looking at retirement, you're not working. Or some people can't even retire nowadays to where they're working later just to pay their bills. But having that residual income from multiple investment property to where tomorrow you won't have to work just as hard to continue paying your bills. That income that you get from the rental investment property can help you, pay those bills. So, you can travel like Rob said, you can travel, you can retire, and you can have that residual income coming in. And that's what I have to say. Start investing early. And there's never too late to start investing. But tomorrow, when you have that residual income coming in, you can build it to where you have enough to where you can live off of it and you don't have to work as hard, you know? Try to look at the gentleman that's 70 years old working in Walmart nowadays. Did he do any kind of investment in his life? He thought that he could live off of Social Security, and that's not the case.
What do you think, Nathan?
It's funny because I just had this conversation with a young couple. They're in their early 30s now. They have two rental properties and are just turning into a third, their primary into a third. And the conversation, I've helped them with all the properties. The conversations now with them are so much more peaceful because they have options. They
That's
now
right.
have wealth built in those properties and they're trying to figure out where they want to go. And they're making major lifestyle changes. They're completely changing careers. They're moving in a totally different direction, and they have all these options that they wouldn't have had if they didn't have those rental properties, that cash flow, and that equity pool sitting there for them already.
And I think that's the transformation that all of us want, right? We want that after we've made the hard work, after we've done the hard decisions, we want to make sure that we have that lifestyle because that provides us with all sorts of freedom when it comes to that. And I can specifically say that in my life that my family bought it real estate, not me personally, I'm investing in real estate now myself, but my family, meaning my mom and dad, they invested in real estate when we were very blue collar, which is a great way of saying poor. We invested in real estate, bought a house, transformed it into a rental, bought the next house, bought a few more properties, rented them out. And now my mom is in her mid 80s. My dad passed away not too long ago, and she's living 100% independently because of cash flow from her properties. It's the
And
life after. It's the life
that's right.
after.
It's the life after, right? She doesn't have to go to work. She's got that residual income coming in every day, you know?
And I think we're in task as professionals in this field with making sure that we give them the opportunity to understand that as their guides, you can use property and mortgages as a tool for the life afterwards. And I think that's where we can be transformational in people's lives as well, is by how we guide them and counsel them in this. Any last words before we wrap up? All right,
Well,
guys.
what I have to say is, you got us as real estate agents, Rob, Nathan, and I, and Chris. So, if you're looking to do some kind of investment, reach out to us. We'll definitely guide you through because, like Chris said, we're not transactional. We're here to help you not just sell you an investment property, but help you find the right tenant and keep that relationship going so that you don't just buy one investment property, but multiple investment property. So
And I'm going
thank
to
you
put
so
all,
much.
yeah, I'm going to put all your contact information in the description down below so people can contact you in your different markets. and they can have an opportunity to talk to you, because I think you guys, this is the great thing about this, is you guys are trying to make people see the value, see the transformation that can take, and really it's about the life afterwards. So if you're tuning in today and you're listening to this, look down below in the description below, and you're going to get all the information from these great real estate agents who are about your transformation and about helping you get where you want to go in real estate.
Thank you.